Okay, right now, as I mentioned before we kicked this all off, we have a microphone up here. If any of you in the audience would like to ask a question of the panel, somebody's got to be the brave first person. All right, we've got one. Yes, sir. You have the microphone.
All right, hi, Ben Bailey from Formation Design Group. This is a question, I guess, for Kevin specifically, but outside of consumer vehicles, has the state considered commercial vehicles? So, for example, if a salt truck or a police car was to be automated, and what positive or negative impacts do you see coming out of that?
Well, we support the industry. So, I mean, really the role of the state government is to create an environment where businesses flourish. So, with the instigation of M-City and the Willow Run, the New American Center.
Kevin, explain that a little bit, just in case people don't know those terms, what M-City is.
So M-City is a 32-acre test site that allows for advanced engineering and R&D work on connected, automated, autonomous vehicles. It's out at the Ann Arbor University of Michigan site. So 32 acres. It was opened last year on July 20th. There are about 48 companies that have invested in it. It's an incredible place. It's like a movie set. You can move the street signs around and lane markings, fire hydrants, and do testing in extreme conditions for autonomous vehicles, ultimately. We've also now just invested in a new site, which is at the old Willow Run GM facility out in Ypsilanti Township. This site's going to be 10 times larger. It'll be 335 acres. And M-City, as I said, is advanced engineering. The New American Center for Mobility will be capable of testing an autonomous vehicle at high speed, 70 miles an hour on a high-speed loop, and go to full certification and verification. So you're seeing a lot of press at the moment about vehicles on the roads that are having accidents that are probably out there too early, to be honest. And we'd like to take that back onto some of the test tracks and get a better handle on how these vehicles function in extreme conditions than on just a simulator.
So did you guys see the little cartoon about a police car, an autonomous police car that stops an autonomous car, and the police car asks the guy, "Do you know why I stopped you?" No, yeah. I think those are going to be the typical things that might happen, right?
But you know, to the questioner's point, there's no question commercial trucks are going to play a huge role in autonomy. And in fact, just this very week, Uber bought a company called Otto. Otto is specializing in making autonomous big commercial trucks. So it is on its way. And Kevin's right, the state is putting the infrastructure out there to be able to test that. Anybody else want? Oh, we got one. All right, sir. You've got the mic.
Jim Brakey, this is a question for any of you, and basically to open a dialogue. So many times in history, we've looked back to the past, considered things that were previous as vogue today to maybe change styling. And in a time when people are downsizing, they're living off the grid, they're living in tiny houses, tree houses, why is it that the automakers can't create vehicles that are more accessible for the masses, the most efficient? They could use technology, but they would be a simpler thing. Any of you?
I think it's a really good question, if I can kick that off.
Please do.
It's our biggest challenge to give people a good amount of cheap transportation. The customer, however, does not want to do any sacrifices either, in terms of safety, in terms of the quality of the vehicle, how long the guarantee has to be. We always look, especially designers, they always look back at the Fiat Panda and the 2CV and all of these really bright, cheap vehicles that gave a certain freedom for a broader audience. I still think that it all comes down to accessibility. And like I said before, if accessibility becomes a certain amount of money per minute instead of a total amount of money that you have to pay for a car to own it, I think that's changing massively the way that you have access to mobility. So that traditional question of can we make a B car that is half of the price, I think can go away at some point.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the market will generally go where it wants to go. And we talked earlier a little bit about the Tata Nano, which was designed and built as the most inexpensive vehicle in the world. In fact, marketed as the cheapest vehicle in India. And people didn't want to buy it. I mean, it ran into a serious problem selling the vehicle because people didn't want to be seen driving the cheapest vehicle. So I'm going to leave it up to the marketing folks. But
yeah, it's pretty hard to sell. Hey, look, I'm really cheap. I don't have money. So yeah. It's got to be.
I suppose another way looking at it might be living off the grid, tiny homes. If you look at that proportionally in terms of what kind of grid most people want to live off. That's not a quality, that's not a judgment. It's like, the fact of the matter is it's perhaps a very thoughtful and adventuresome segment of society that's interested in doing that, but from a value proposition for a company, that's a difficult thing. You're better off probably buying an old De CV or a Fiat Panda, right? It's like, I don't know, it's a tough one.
It might be a marketing issue. You know, it was marketed as the cheapest car, and that's what turned out, is people didn't want to be seen driving something that was cheap. Maybe if it had been marketed, to the questioner's question, as the automotive equivalent of a tiny house, maybe the mindset would have been different.
It gets back to that notion of design as a vehicle for desire as well. I mean, when your dreams are imbued in this thing you're wearing and sitting inside, all these other factors do come into play about how the vehicle looks and what it means about you. For some people, that's going to mean less, but for the market, it's a different matter.
But the wheels were still too small.
Yeah. Proportion. Okay, we've got somebody else that's been very patiently waiting.
I was very intrigued by, Marc, your remark about looking in the museum and where you see looking at the entire history of past designs of something, in this case cars, and you said, well, that one really nailed it. And you could say that looking back over this period of time, that you nailed it. I think the challenge for us is looking forward, and that's the challenge that looking forward, how can you make a forecast that what you're working on has success built in? You know, I'm always sort of looking at past examples of success in all forms to try to see if there's a lesson in it.
Right.
Are there some lessons that can be taken from that remark about that one really nailed it?
I think there are, and I think what it comes down to basically, if you're going to look at prior experience, if you think of history as, there's that old notion, history's philosophy, teaching by example. What it really comes down to is what's the altitude you're coming from to look back. And I think if you look at human inclinations, if you look at human desire, if you think of, let's say, mobility, because that's the sphere we seem to have landed in terms of autonomy or public transportation, ownership, or whatever those models are, you can see tensions and opportunities through history. If you look at American history, it's quite fascinating. If you think of transportation in America in the second half of the 19th century, for instance, Europeans looked, they were incredibly impressed by Mississippi steamboats with these massive rooms where everyone was sort of sitting together. Same with early train cars in America, which seemed way more communal. Really, that came down to economics. Over time, it became more divided the way it was in Europe, with sort of compartments, if you will. So that was one tension between, if you will, the broader experience and the more private experience. I think then it comes down to also this sense of, well, I want transportation now. There's a period where that would have meant owning a horse, or horse and carriage, or a bicycle, or a car. How big's the infrastructure associated with those things? How autonomous are you? So I think we see these things played out over and over. I mean, what we do know, I think Stuart Brand sort of proposed this in the 60s. People like access to tools. Tools can be literally tools, but they can be modes of transportation. They might want them when they want them. They might want to own them so that they've got them whenever they need them. So I'm not so sure you can go back literally like reading tea leaves and figure out the path forward. But I think you're always going to see this tension, if you will, between what people ideally want and what they can practically want, what can be delivered. So I'm trying to think who it was. Danny Hills said the accumulated past is the best resource for innovation. You know, the clues are there somehow. We're the ones who've got to make it in the present. I don't know if that helps. It probably sounds rather wishy-washy, but okay.
Very good. Next.
Hi. I'm going to ask for some predictions from you. With the transportation industry accounting for 28% of all carbon emissions in the U.S. today, when do you foresee a majorative shift to electric, and what do you think the mix will be between battery and hydrogen?
I think the industry is moving, obviously, a lot to different technologies to power up a car. I think there's a couple of things that we don't talk about. If you want to do a lot of electric cars, if we would replace 10% of all the electric cars today, the electric grid has to be built up pretty massively, which might double the bill of your own home. People don't want that either, right? So I think there is a lot of movement in different research areas. Electric should not be the only answer. And I think we as an industry, and I'm not talking here as a Ford person, but more as a personal opinion, is that we have to be careful for the trap that electric is the only solution for the future to replace standard combustion engines. We got to keep on researching for better solutions that are really zero emissions in how to make it and how to use it. But that's a long-term strategy.
That's a great point. One thing I'd like to add is you're right. Basically, transportation accounts for 28 to 30% of all greenhouse gases. But if you look at just light passenger cars and trucks, which are the ones that are getting regulated right now, because remember, there's no emission standards for jet travel, there's nothing on ships, there's nothing on trains, there's nothing on off-road equipment, ag equipment, or anything like that. So if you look at what the automotive industry as we know it represents, it's about 18% of all GHGs. And yet the automotive industry is far more heavily regulated when it comes to GHGs than any other industry out there. And I've got an issue with this. I think the industry would agree it's got to do its part to reduce them. But right now, far more burden is being put on the automotive industry. And I'm saying, what about the other 82%? Because you can get the automotive industry to zero, and you still have not addressed 82% of the problem.
So the California Air Resource Board legislation on transportation equipment, semis, has driven towards zero emissions. And that was actually pushed back pretty hard recently. But now they're coming out with electric semi-trucks as an innovative response to...
That's being tested.
Correct.
Correct.
So do you think that those regulations are going to drive it forward through CAFE standards for the rest of the transportation?
Yes, I do. Yeah, look, and we should get more from the panel just from me, but the industry is not against the goal. What the industry has a problem with, especially when you look at the California Air Resources Board regulations, they're Byzantine. They are so incredibly complicated that people on the CARB have a very hard time explaining them in detail. And they change constantly. And they have a very aggressive timetable for it. And I'll speak for the industry in this standpoint. It's like, this is good. The goals we all agree on. But why are you attacking 18% of the problem when another 82% is not really doing a whole lot, at least not yet? There's a lot of talk as to what should be done, but it hasn't hit yet. And sorry to interject so much, but...
and especially, I like what you said about also the other industries like jets. And it's not to put jets in a bad light, but there is one air carrier that is going to offer transatlantic flights for $39, okay? All of this room is saying, great, I'm going to the other side of the ocean and I'm going to have some fun. But that's a conscious decision because that doesn't come for free, right? That comes at a cost, and it's not just an industry that we have to limit. It's in ourselves as well to make those decisions if you want to put a burden on things, yes or no. And $39 is, I mean, I'm coming from Europe, so I applaud to go cheaply to Europe, but it's how we keep on consuming.
Right.
Okay, we have another very patient questioner here.
Hi. So I was happy to hear you all bring up how to engage the next generation, and my question revolves around that. So one of our earlier speakers brought up directly exposure and accessibility to technology as a way to kind of bring in the next generation of designers, and I think indirectly brought up diversity and representation within the field. So my question is, how do, and this is for everybody in the room as well, how do we as designers ensure that our field is representative of the population we are serving, the global population we are serving?
Well, I think I mean, the subject is so broad that we have to really, as individuals, all get involved. I mean, I think it's the biggest thing that we need to do is take a certain amount of personal responsibility for, you know, getting youngsters and getting people involved in this industry and guiding the direction of the industry. Again, the Michigan Design Council, that's one of the things we did. We said, okay, where can we start, you know, in this area of industrial design in Michigan to promote it? And we decided to promote it from an educational point of view, K through college areas. So I'd encourage you to get involved in all of the different aspects of, you know, bringing youngsters into this business and guiding this industry forward into the areas that it needs to be.
Yeah, I think, and you know, we have difficulties obviously in car design to attract more women. However, I've been able to, I think my last 4 hires are actually women. And they give a really good balance to the things that we do. It's fantastic. And
was that a conscious decision on your part?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have to keep on stimulating that portion, because every presentation that we do, they really give a different perspective that we as men need to recognize in our business, because it's been very long a man-like business, and futuring car design was very long about the future is kind of cold and winter and dark, you know, all those futurists, and you know, I keep telling the design community, we talking about spring, women and a much more positive side. And that's giving completely different results, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I think, again, if we can, thinking of design as a discipline that finds its way into curriculum in schools broadly, so it's just not associated with, let's say, for want of a better term, I think Charles Eames used it, the gifted few or wealthier school districts, ensuring it's sort of really subsumed into something way broader. That's another way to do this. Kids are way more conversant with, spend way more time with things that have been designed and have been created for their use by industrial designers. So that there's the kind of bedrock there, if you will. It's not an alien, you know, it's not like suddenly studying painting and you've never been in a gallery. This is something that's already part of people's lives, and that extra dimension that's legitimized at a kind of academic level, that's another way, in my mind, that could help in this regard.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and I really like what I'm hearing here from the panel. It's got to be a conscious decision to reach out. And what they're talking about here, Kevin and Mark too, it starts at the educational level. You know, if you don't have women or other minorities getting into design schools, and guess what? They're really expensive too, by the way. But if you don't create that opportunity, they're never going to end up working at levels like these guys are. Okay, we've got another patient waiter here of a question to be asked.
Yeah, my question is related about current cars. Do you think it would be economically feasible to develop some sort of upgrade for current cars to become electric or any other type of propulsion? And also about the autonomous transportation to upgrade current cars to become autonomous. Do you think there's an opportunity for that to avoid them going to waste? Because that's a lot of cars.
Yeah, I think certainly from the autonomous vehicle side of it, there's a potential and there's a lot of interest from the aftermarket companies to build systems that can be incorporated into the vehicle. You think of things like TomTom and some of the GPS units that I can envisage seeing systems that will be more vehicle-to-vehicle type communication systems and vehicle-to-infrastructure. So that seems to me within the realm of possibility and feasibility. Upgrading a gas vehicle to an electric sounds like a project, but not necessarily an industry.
Yeah, there's people who do that. They're called car customizers, right? Yeah, there's a lot of that that goes on.
I don't think we can rely, though, on third-party suppliers by themselves put on the market autonomous technologies. If you see the amount of complication that we are going through from a regulation point of view, from a trustability point of view and all of that, we spend a lot of research money in that to make sure that that's going to be really good. And if there's no shortcut there. If you do it total vehicle, you can really create a new type of focus that you cannot do if you start upgrading old cars.
I agree with you. I think, though, in the long run, I think I'm looking out 25 years, I think that there are these opportunities. Some great person said once that if you don't want any of this technology on your car, buy an antique car. So I think there's also ways to get around it.
Yeah, you know, this has been talked a lot about over the decades. How do you bring a car back, just upgrade it? But guess what? People like the newest styles, the newest technology. They go for what's new. However, you got a good issue that you're raising here too, because there's a new company coming onto the scene here called Local Motors that 3D prints car. And their vision is when your car wears out, you don't bring it back and they put it in the used car lot. You bring it back, they grind it all up, recycle it, and print you a new one. So I think maybe that's where we might be headed, not taking an old car and try to get more life out of it, just grind it up and make a new one altogether.
Can I make a statement, though?
Please.
97% of our cars are recyclable.
That's a great point.
So people don't realize that, but there's a large percentage of recyclability of the materials itself that are being used, but the recyclability of the car itself is huge. And one of the problems is electric batteries. That's the one that is not recyclable. That's the biggest issue.
That's right. Yeah, that's a great point. 100% of all the metal that goes in a car gets recycled. Absolutely. 100%. You know, when I was a kid growing up, driving around in this area, you'd run across junkyards with piles and piles and piles of junked cars. And you'd see mountains of used tires. You don't see that much anymore because it's all getting recycled, even the tires.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've got somebody else here. Come on up, sir.
So, my name's Steve Nelson. I work in the medical industry. One of the things I've been thinking about, I went on the Ford tour. I've been thinking about my responsibility as a designer to the reliability of the product. So, when I design things, you know, I think about how the system works, but I don't have any actual visibility into the internal components of the item that I'm making, and often the items that I'm working on have circuit boards and batteries and things of that nature, and the experience for the user involves those things working, right? So what is your view on the holistic experience of a person using a product that I design, and what is my responsibility to ensure that that experience is positive beyond the components that I control directly?
So I don't think that's my only responsibility. That's why I'm working for a company that has a lot of different specialisms. But you know what? When a car gets dirty too quickly, it's my fault. When Sync Gen 3 doesn't work, it's my fault. When there is reflection in the rear glass because of shapes it's my fault. So we are really, really conscious, and we have a lot of processes going on that tries to avoid all of those error states. I can't do that by myself, but I think my team is extremely knowledgeable on a lot more things that I ever thought they would gain knowledge on, because we have to. Do we take that responsibility seriously? Absolutely. Can we influence it? Absolutely. Can we avoid all the things that go wrong? No.
I think from a designer's point of view, though, as well, the difference between what I'd call a draftsman and a designer is someone who thinks about all of those things, someone who brings all those elements. And that's why this group, this industry, this industrial design industry is so exciting for people, because you've got the opportunity to look at all different areas and aspects and influences on what you're designing. Now, each product is going to have some sort of standard, or if you're designing a spoon, there's a lot less regulation on a spoon. If you're designing an autonomous vehicle like these guys are working on, there's a lot of people looking over your shoulder. So it's an opportunity. There's just opportunities everywhere in the industrial design world. But you know, as a young designer, think of everything that you can possibly think of. It's the fun part of the job.
And then there's collaboration. We've not talked about that. That to me is another huge part of the designer's toolkit. It's a collaborative enterprise, whether it's with clients or whether it's with peers. We've also touched on this with some of the other questions. It's also about a kind of whole systems thinking, kind of understanding how everything's interconnected, especially as things become more complicated, but understanding you're part of it, you know, so that something won't fail because of you. Having sort of trusted and trustworthy colleagues working together in a sort of integrated fashion. You know, you might the buck might stop with you for things, but frankly there are other people, you know, who you trust to try and sort of mitigate all of that. So I don't know if that helps, but it's one of the most amazingly optimistic and collaborative professions I can think of, and that's the key to it.
Well said, yeah.
Very good. Anybody else? Going once. Going twice. Thank you very much. You've been a terrific audience here.
Thank you.
But especially a round of applause for the panelists.